Good evening, and thank you for stopping by. Today, I'm going to do an update about the situation with COVID-19 in Turkey. I did a video 4 or 5 days ago about what was happening in Turkey. It was in the early stages of that very accelerating part of exponential growth, and we're going to revisit that and see how it's going. So my first presentation was on the 27th of March. At that point, we were at something close to 600,000 cases confirmed in the world. We're now well over 900,000. This is several hours old already. In that time, Turkey has climbed from the number 14 position to the number 10 in terms of the most cases in a country in the world. So they've been moving up the leaderboard in a way that's, unfortunate. You'll see, this is an article that is talking about President Erdogan urging Turks to stay at home to bring a quick end to the outbreak, but also said the nation could not afford to fully halt economic activity. And that's the really difficult part here. The only way to halt the virus is to really halt and stop. And once we do that, we really affect our economies. And I think that failing to stop will ultimately lead to greater harm in terms of lost lives. Turkey is also releasing a large number of prisoners from its jails. Its jails are overcrowded, and we know from other countries that jails are a place where the coronavirus spreads rapidly, and there's a very high toll it takes. They're actually releasing 90,000 inmates. 45, I guess, are going to be under house arrest or some such thing. But it's also important to recognize that this does not include political prisoners, terrorists, or those convicted of sex crimes. And it's interesting that political prisoners get put in that group. I'll just leave it at that. So what's been happening in Turkey since I made my last video? I had data from the 25th and the 26th. This is the cumulative number of cases over the last week, starting at 2,433 to 15,000. So what you're looking at here is the daily increase. So when you go from 2,400 to 3,600, that's 1,200 new cases. That's 49% growth. When you go from 3,600 to 5,600, you've added 2,000 cases. That's 57% growth that single day. When we talk about the overall growth rate, we're talking about across sort of these days. You'll see there's wide fluctuations between days, and in particular, the last 4 days, there's been this bouncing up and down between a high reporting day and a low reporting day. So we had a high reporting day of 2,700. The day after, we had a 1,600 individual increase, and then it was 2,100s again. So I think we'll see another surge in cases probably tomorrow. We've also now starting to have the epidemic be in Turkey long enough that we're starting to see fatalities. A week ago, it was at 59. It's risen to 277. The data that I referred to in my presentation was the 92 deaths and the 5,698 cases in Turkey. So the situation today on April 1st, 15,679 cases compared to the 27th, just 5 days ago, where we had 5,698 cases. So if you do the subtraction, that's 10,000 new cases, or 175% additional cases in that period of time. The country's at 277 fatalities as opposed to 92. I like saying fatalities. Deaths just seem so very stark, but fatalities really no different. Anyway, that's 185 new deaths, so that's a 200% increase. If you look at that across the 5 days, you're looking at something like a 25-ish% per day growth. You'll see that the growth rate and the number of fatalities has been more stable than the number of reported cases. So there's a level 3 avoid all non-essential travel to Turkey warning in the United States. So we should not come to Turkey for fear of getting coronavirus. I think that's actually quite amusing, since the country that has the worst coronavirus outbreak in the world right now is the USA. So I would actually turn it around and say, if you're in Turkey, this is not the greatest place to visit right now. When we're looking at coronavirus outbreak, it's really important to look at population density. Now, this is Italy, of course, and the epidemic in Italy started in and around Milan and north of Milan in that area. It's an area of high population density, high economic activity, a lot of tourism, a lot of economic travel. And it was able to spread quickly and devastatingly in that area. When we look at Turkey, there's a couple areas, Istanbul and down the coast and in at the capital, where there's pretty high population density. So that's very much likely where the growth is going to be the greatest. And so I went looking for some information about population sizes of different parts of Turkey. Found out that Istanbul is 11 million people. Bursa is, I guess, the fourth or fifth largest city. It's very close to Istanbul with 1.6 million. Izmir down here on the coast, 3 million, and in the center of the capital, 5 million. So those are the areas where I think the coronavirus would be taking off. I actually then did find a map of where the coronavirus cases are the most prevalent. This was actually Wikipedia. I should have thought to look up it earlier. But you'll see Istanbul has the highest number, and you can actually see that in the populous areas along the coast and inland near the capital are the areas where we're seeing the greatest number of cases. Well, what is this next week going to bring? Well, I think this next week is going to bring pretty rough increases in cases. So last time I did this, I compared it to Italy because it struck me and it struck a lot of people that the cases in Turkey was accumulating faster than Italy. And at the time, and even still, Italy is looked at as an example of how bad things can get so quickly. So the epidemic in Turkey grew from 10 cases. That's sort of a starting point we're using in all of these. Not the calendar date, but when that country first hit 10 cases. 10 cases to 15,700 cases in 17 days. The epidemic in Italy, which we know is so devastating, grew from 10 to about 15,000 in 21 or 22 days. It actually happened between the 21st and 22nd day. If we look at Spain, which was already, again, it's a very horrible situation right now, but at the time, it took them 24 or 25 days to grow from 10 to 15,000. So when we compare those countries in Europe to Turkey, Turkey is outgrowing them all, suggesting that the epidemic is going to get worse there much faster. The only country that was growing slower than Turkey that surged ahead in terms of the per day increase is the United States. So the United States, has this at this point in its growth, had a very steep increase in the acceleration. So looking at that information, we can actually look then at what's happening a week later. We can look at a week later in Spain. We can look at it a week later in Italy and in the U.S. because they'd already been at 15,000. What we find is Italy had grown to 36,000 in a week, Spain 58,000, and the U.S. to 83,000. Based on some exponential modeling, which I'm not going to show you, and these comparisons, I think Turkey's going to have about 70,000 cases on April 8th, a week from today. So we're at 15,000 now. We're going to add, I think, about 55,000 cases in the next week. So it's really going to start getting rough. When we look at fatalities, deaths, these are the death curves. Oh, that sounds terrible. For the countries. The red and green here are Italy and Turkey that are almost identical. You see lower death rates in Spain and the U.S. for the same point in the cycle. We're starting at how far after 15,000 cases do we start to see what level of death and so forth. In the situation with Italy, Italy grew by about 1,400 deaths in that week following the point where they hit 15,000. The U.S. reached about 1,200 deaths. Actually, that Italy statistic is not entirely true because it depends on when you actually grab that. At the 15,000 case threshold, Italy saw 3,000 additional deaths, Spain 4,000, and the U.S. 1,200. So I got that backwards. But based on the rate of case increase in the modeling I did that I'm not showing you, I think we'll probably see about 1,200 deaths about this time next week. So if we want to take a summary, this, just so you know, is two snapshots of the Johns Hopkins dashboard from today, from April 1st. One of them happens to be, at 2 in the morning, the other's at 9 at night. And we, as a world, we saw 75,040 plus 75,000 new cases confirmed. In Wuhan, the center of the epidemic in China, it took 30 or 40 days to reach 75,000 cases, and now as a globe, we add more than 75,000 cases a day, and that's increasing. So it'll be 100,000 or 200,000 a day very soon. So getting back to sort of the summarizing what I think will be happening in Turkey next week, I think we'll be hitting 70,000 in a week and adding about 15,000 new cases a day. I think we're going to go from about 200 deaths to about 1,200 deaths. And at that point, we'll be adding about 200 deaths per day. So there's been 200 deaths so far cumulatively in the outbreak in Turkey. And within a week, I think we'll see 200 deaths being reported every day. So I think right now Turkey's at that point where the rate of infection has gotten extremely high. It's gotten a hold in many communities, and we're going to see this very, very rapid increase in cases and in fatalities. And so if you're in Turkey, please take extreme caution and extreme care. It's going to be a difficult time for the next several weeks, I think, and I wish you the best.